Hello everyone, my name is HAFIZUDDIN. I'm going to further explain about the translation technique that can be used in the text. So from part 1, question 1, the first translation technique is modulation. Modulation is using a phrase that is different in the source and target language to convey the same ideas. So for example, wind down your windows. That is the source language, and when being translated to Malay, it will become turunkan tingkap anda. The second one is literal translation. The literal translation is direct translation. For example, tests have shown it is more environmentally friendly. That is the source language, and when it is being translated to Malay, it will become hujan telah menunjukkan ia adalah lebih mesra alam. From question 2, the first translation technique is modulation. Modulation is also using a phrase that is different in the source and target language to convey the same ideas. So, for the example, take a greener commute. Ambil perjalanan yang lebih hijau when being translated to Malay. The second one is literal translation. That is direct translation. So, if you, for the example, if you travel to work by car, leave it at home for a couple of days of the week. That is the source language. After it's being translated to Malay, it will become, jika anda pergi kerja menggunakan kereta, tinggalkannya di rumah untuk beberapa hari seminggu. For question 3, the first translation technique is literal translation. That is direct translation. For the example, put a plant on your desk. After it being translated to Malay, it will become meletakkan tumbuhan di meja anda. For the second translation technique is modulation. Modulation is using a phrase that is different in the source and target language to convey the same ideas. For the example, getting a sore throat and stuffed up nose. After it being translated to Malay, it will become mendapat sakit tekak dan hidung tersumbat. Moving on to question 4, the first translation technique is literal translation. Literal translation is a direct translation. For example, move your desk to the window. Alihkan meja anda ke tingkap. The second translation technique in question 4 is naturalization. Naturalization is a transferred word adapted to the targeted language. Either is in pronunciation or even a morphology. So, the example is the word carbon. The word carbon after it is being translated to Malay will also be carbon with a slightly different alphabet. Question 5, the first translation technique is modulation. Modulation is using a phrase that is different in the source and target language to convey the same idea. For example, choose an eco-friendly sport. After it being translated to Malay, it will become pilih sukan yang mesra alam. The second one is literal translation, that is direct translation. For example, there are plenty of sports and activities that will improve your health. After it's being translated to Malay, it will become terdapat banyak sukan dan aktiviti yang akan meningkatkan kesihatan anda. Moving on to question 6. The first translation technique is modulation. Modulation is using a phrase that is different in the source and target language to convey the same idea. For example, get some sleep. After it's being translated to Malay, it will become dapatkan tidur yang mencukupi. As you can see, the word mencukupi is added to make the sentence makes more sense. The second one is literal translation, that is direct translation. For example, making sure you get enough sleep is a good way to stay healthy. After it's been translated in Malay, it will become memastikan anda mendapat tidur yang mencukupi adalah cara yang baik untuk kekal sihat. The third translation technique is naturalization. Naturalization is a transferred word adapted to the translated language, either its pronunciation or even morphology. For example, the word immune. After it's been translated to Malay, it will become imunisasi. In question 7, the first translation technique is functional equivalent. Functional equivalent is translating a word in the source language with the functionally equivalent target language word. So, for example, the word printer is used and being translated to Malay will become mesin cetak. As you can see, mesin cetak is the functionally equivalent target language word in Malay. So the second one is modulation. Modulation is using a phrase that is different in source and target language to convey the same idea. For the example, only switch on. After it's being translated, it will become hanya hidupkan. The third translation technique is literal translation, that is direct translation. For example, can cause a form of indoor air pollution. After it's being translated to Malay, it will become boleh menyebabkan satu bentuk pencemaran udara dalaman. Moving on to part 2. For question A, the first translation technique is transference. Transference is a source language word. It is directly taken into the targeted language text with no translation. It is commonly used in translating the name of a place or even an organization. For the second translation technique is naturalization. Naturalization is a transferred word adapted to target language, either it is pronunciation or even morphology. For example, the word logistic can be translated as logistic as well, but with a slightly different alphabet. So the third translation technique is literal translation, that is direct translation. Direct translation, for example, is mereka membantu kami untuk menempah penginapan. After it's been translated to English, it will become they help us book accommodation. For question B, the first translation technique is transference. A source language word is taken directly into targeted language text with no translation. The first example is Gore Pane. That is a name of a place. So the second one is literal translation, that is direct translation. For example, perjalanan hari ini sangat mencabar. After it's being translated to English, it will become the journey today is very challenging. The third translation is couplets. Couplets occurs when translators combines two translation techniques. So, for example, kami menginap di Hotel Dhaulagiri yang mempunyai pemandangan terindah di dunia. After it's been translated, we accommodate at Hotel Dhaulagiri that has the most beautiful scenery in the world. As you can see, it combines two translation technique, that is transference and even direct translation. Question C, the first translation technique is transference, a source language which is directly taken into targeted language with no translation, such as Punhil as a name of a place. The second translation technique is literal translation or direct translation. So, for example, pada altitude yang tinggi, after it's been translated, it will become at high altitudes. The last question, question D, the first translation technique is transference. A source language word is directly taken into targeted language with no translation. For the example is Lower Sinua. Lower Sinua is a name of a place. So the third translation technique is literal translation. That is direct translation. Hari ini kami memulakan perjalanan kami. After it's being translated to English, it will come today we started our journey. There are a lot of challenges that occur during translating the text. The first challenges is deciding which techniques that should be used. During translating, it is often that people could get confused in translating their work. This is because many texts or phrases can be translated with multiple techniques, and some of these techniques can almost be the same that can confuse the translator. The second challenges is multiple word verbs. During translating the text, there are some words that consist of two words to convey a meaning. For example, stuff up nose is disumbat atas hidung when being translated directly and the sentence does not make any sense. So it have to be translated through modulation where it's translated in different form of word that still convey the same meaning, hidung tersumbat. For the third challenges is missing word in translating. During translating, there are some words that are not available in the translated language. Thus, translators have to translate the word without changing any of its characteristic. For example, porter in English language is the same exact word, porter in Malay language.